Hi there, I'm Andrew McComb and welcome to Outlier. In this week's episode, I'm in beautiful Kenna Beach, Motueka, New Zealand, where I'm going to be speaking to Nathan Faavae. He's a 6 times World Adventure Racing champion, and he's also a renowned entrepreneur. This episode is going to be incredible. I've been looking forward to it for a while. Let's go and meet Nathan. Nathan, welcome to Outlier.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kenna Beach, upper Nelson area of New Zealand, another Outlier destination. What brings you here?
Oh, we came out to Kenna Beach about 20 years ago, and it was largely just to get away from sort of the crowds and live a little bit more rurally. And Jodie and I had started a family. We had one young child, and we just really wanted our kids to grow up on a beach actually, and sort of experience the lifestyle that you can by living on the coast.
Well, it's funny, you do all these world adventure races all around the world, and it almost seems like the perfect destination. You've got the water here, you've got the environment behind for the climbing and the running and the mountain climbing and mountain running, etc. So it's almost like a little microcosm, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Where I live is ideal for training for the adventure racing that I do. We're really lucky. We're surrounded by a number of national parks in this region, and living on the beach for me is amazing because one of my passions is ocean paddling and surf ski paddling. So to be able to walk off the front of the property and go paddling is a real treat. But there's just lots of variety around. You know, I think we're quite lucky. We're one of those places where you can literally be up in the snow, you know, one day and back at the beach the same day, really. So, yeah, it's a great part of the world.
Now, Nathan Faavae hasn't reached his potential, is what your school teachers used to say, and now you're a 6-time World Adventure Race champion. How does that work? Where does that all begin?
Well, I guess they were right. I guess the teachers were right back then. Yeah, I think growing up, my parents would say I was always an adventurous kid. I was always curious and always exploring, but I think for many years I wasn't quite sure what my pathway was, or I hadn't really figured out in life what I wanted to do was probably the big thing. But I've always enjoyed being outside, and as a family we would often go away on camping trips and just camp at beaches, and our dad would take us fishing and snorkeling and doing that sort of thing. And I guess looking back on my childhood, I always enjoyed those outdoor experiences. I always looked forward to going away camping, and I think that was because of the adventure that sort of provided, really. Just the simple living, and you know, I was always keen to try and light fires on the beach and go and forage for food. And so that was probably the beginning, really, as a young person, just realising that, you know, I was interested in that stuff, but it certainly wasn't until I was a teenager when, you know, I really got my teeth into adventure sport, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. So were you always into sport growing up, or were you how were you as a teenager? Was, you know, you were born here in Nelson, so was it a good lifestyle growing up, or did you get in a bit of trouble, or?
So growing up in Nelson, when I did back in the 80s, it was a pretty conservative town, and it's got a lot to offer for the outdoors, but I think as a young Polynesian growing up in Nelson, it was quite challenging, and unfortunately, what tends to happen in a lot of those environments is, you sort of get together with a bit of riffraff, and certainly me and my mates, when I was a teenager, we're all adventurous, but we were probably a little bit bored, and I think we were actually kind of more menaces to society. So I got in a bit of trouble when I was a teenager, and nothing too bad, but enough for me to kind of realise that the path I was on wasn't a sensible one. Like it wasn't going to take me anywhere really. And so I was lucky enough to have some opportunities to make some changes when I was quite young. I've always been pretty active as a kid. Like my father was a sportsman, and my brother and sister are both very sporty. I was as well when I was a kid. I grew up playing rugby, soccer, and kind of dabbling a bit at cricket, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed being active and being part of a team. But as a teenager, when we started to, drugs and alcohol and parties and driving around in fast cars and stuff entered, I think I just went through a period there for a few years where I was a bit confused as to, what I actually wanted to do. But thankfully I came out of it in a good way.
So I'm from Dunedin, so I totally understand that. For me, I'd have to say I was pretty depressed growing up as a teenager, and if it wasn't for my sport, I would have been, well, who knows where I would have been. But you mentioned the opportunities that came along. What were some of those that got you out of that and more into the sport side of things?
Yeah, looking back, I think a significant time in my sort of teenage years was the outdoor education program at the school I was in. So because I'd always been interested in sort of the outdoors, even when I was kind of juggling, the parties and the drinking and playing around with drugs and things, the outdoor education program at school held interest to me as well. And I got involved in that, and that was probably my first taste of really starting to understand what is in the mountains kind of behind where we live. Like, even though I'd grown up in a family that was sporty and was into camping and things, we hadn't really gone into what I consider to be the real backcountry or beyond kind of the front country. And the school program sort of introduced me to that, and I started to realise that there's this big wild world of wilderness, just literally, a one range behind where I've sort of grown up. And so that kind of fascinated me. And then when I left school, I left when I was 16 years old, and I tried to sort of make it in the world. I had a few jobs and different things, and that didn't go all that well, to be honest. And halfway through the year, I sort of reached a bit of a bottom, probably the lowest point I'd had in my life. I was 16 and a half years old. I was out of home. I tried to, work in the real world, and that hadn't been that successful, and I was in trouble with the police for a period. And I had this opportunity to go and do an outdoor adventure program for kind of youth at risk. And I thought, great, that sounds fun. It was certainly a better alternative to what the other option was. And that course that I did was a major turning point for me, because not only did I sort of get exposed to more outdoor adventure possibilities, but what I really got to see was that there was people who made a career out of working in the outdoors. And for me, that was the big light bulb moment. That was like, oh, actually, that's what I want to do. I'd like to be an outdoor instructor or work in the outdoors in some shape or form. And up until that point, I had no idea what I wanted to do sort of prior to leaving school or for a career. And so for me, that was it. I ended up going back to school, and ever since then, I have just basically been on a pathway of working in the outdoors and really just doing things that interest me and things that I enjoy.
And so what was your first foray into, I guess, more challenging sport? Was it straight to adventure racing, or how did it work for you?
So I guess with with my involvement in getting into the outdoors more, so like lots of tramping, and I started kayaking and rock climbing and snowboarding and skiing. I pretty much did everything. And I started to have quite a fascination into how far you could actually push yourself. And I guess it'd be fair to say, or my wife Jodie will say this quite often, is that I don't tend to moderate things that much. So if I get into something, I get into it in a pretty big way. For me, it wasn't about let's just go and do this nice tramping trip. For me, it was like, how far can we go in one day? Or why do you have to stop at the end of the day? Why can't you just walk into the night? We've got torches. And so I always had this fascination of endurance. And I realised at quite a young age that I got a lot of satisfaction from really pushing myself quite hard and doing hard things. So I started doing endurance triathlons as a teenager as well. So I started running marathons and doing sort of one-day multi-sport races, running through mountains and kayaking down rivers and biking here and biking there. And that sort of introduced me to the world of, I guess, endurance sport, and that became a big part of my life. Well, it still is, really.
And so mountain biking was that your first foray with you, from what I've read in your book, New Zealand mountain biking team?
So mountain biking was my first real competitive sport. So I got into mountain biking in the late 80s, early 90s, and for me it was an amazing kind of discovery because bikes were exciting. It was innovative, they were new, you could go and do jumps and skids, but for me the biggest thing was you could just explore so much in such a short time. So I started riding my bike hours and hours and hours a day with a few of my mates, and then a race came to Nelson and a few of our friends said, you should go and do the race. And I was like, yeah, I'm doing lots of riding, I'll go and do that. And I went and did it and actually won the race, and then realised that, man, I'm actually pretty good at this, and started to do sort of more racing. And that fast forwarded into a pretty successful career mountain biking. I was in the New Zealand mountain bike team for 5 years. Qualified for the Olympics in 1996. My best national ranking was number 2 in New Zealand for cross-country riding, and I got to travel. I managed to travel to a number of races in Australia, North America and Asia with sport. So that gave me a taste of what it's like to be a semi-professional athlete, and also gave me a taste of what it's like to travel the world doing your sport, something you're passionate about.
Did you get to the Olympics? Did you compete?
I didn't end up racing the Olympics. I qualified for Atlanta in 1996, and it was a medal or a demonstration sport. And I was actually over in the States training for the Olympics in 96. I was in Boulder in Colorado, and we got a fax. Back in those days, it was sort of pre-email. And we got a fax from the New Zealand Federation saying, fortunately for the sport of mountain biking, it had become a full medal sport, because the sport had started in the United States and it was very popular, so they decided to make it a full medal sport, which was great for the sport. But what it meant for a lot of riders around the world was that mountain biking was no longer a demonstration sport. It was now an official sport, so it came under the code of cycling. So what that meant for me was that the New Zealand cycling team was already full. They already had their road, track and time trial riders, and they had no room for anyone else. So myself and the number 1 ranked New Zealand rider at the time didn't get to race the Olympics because there was no room in the cycling team. So it was
even though it was a specialist event, mountain biking.
Yeah, because a country like New Zealand is only limited to a number of riders. So I think in the New Zealand team that year for men, they were limited to about probably 30 riders, or may have been less. And in order to take the mountain bikers, they would have had to drop some of the roadies or the trackies, and that was never going to happen.
So they dropped the sport from a New Zealand perspective, rather than drop because they're very good at the road cycling and that, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think it was just at that time they just weren't prepared to sort of reduce the road cycling team, and I understand that. And the other thing too is that for a lot of cyclists at the time, mountain biking wasn't seen as a real serious sport. Thankfully, our top female rider, who used to live close to here, she got to ride the mountain bike race in the Olympics because she was also in the road cycling team. So she got to ride.
Very good. So was that a disappointing moment for you that put you on another path, or you kept going in the sport, or?
Yeah, so after the Olympic kind of sort of saga, I was really disillusioned with mountain biking. And I decided that was it. I sort of quit. I'd put so much into trying to get to the Olympics and had got there, and then that didn't happen. I was just like, that's me. I just couldn't be bothered with it anymore. And I wanted a sporting challenge, and I'd always been intrigued, always knew that when my mountain biking days were over, I'd go back to racing the coast to coast. I'd done that a couple of times pre-mountain biking, and it's such an iconic race in New Zealand, and in many ways it probably interested me more than just being a specific mountain biker. I like the idea of being a mountain runner, a downriver paddler and a cyclist. So I decided to go back and try and win the coast to coast. So I made that a goal for a couple of years. Got pretty close. I got a third and a second, and then I decided that it wasn't that important to me to win the coast to coast. What was more exciting at that point was to get into adventure racing. So pretty much in the space of about 3 or 4 years, I went from being a committed mountain biker, a couple of years of racing coast to coast, and then I went into adventure racing, and that's been the last 20 years.
So for the viewers' sake, what is adventure racing and why is it different to other multi-sports?
So adventure racing is a multi-discipline, multi-day event. So in New Zealand we have multi-sport, which is essentially like triathlon or Ironman, but we replace the swim with kayaking. So instead of having a swim bike run, we have a lot of events in New Zealand, just a kayak bike run. And the other difference between multi-sport and I guess Ironman is that Ironman is generally an urban event. You're running on streets and cycling on roads. Multi-sport races are generally in the wilderness areas, so you're normally running over mountains or through mountain passes, and the kayak stages are usually either on sort of wild ocean or down, whitewater rivers. So they're pretty exciting sort of events if you're into that sort of thing. Adventure racing kind of takes multi-sport and multiplies it by 5 or by 10. So you take an event like Coast to Coast, which is a one-day event. A good athlete will go through the year in 12 or 13 hours, or maybe less. Adventure races, winning times are normally designed to be about 100 to 120 hours. So a race is normally 4 to 5 days. Another big difference between adventure racing and multi-sport, and a thing that appeals to me, is that adventure racing is a team sport. It's a small team, but it is a team. It's 4 people. And a team must be mixed gender, so that adds a really interesting dynamic to the team as well. And I think for me, having grown up doing team sports, rugby and soccer primarily, and then going and racing as an individual athlete for, quite a long time, 7 or 8 years of being a mountain biker and a multi-sporter, the appeal of getting back into a team was quite strong for me. And when I got into adventure racing in 1999, that was one of the things I really enjoyed, was being on the start line as part of a team as opposed to standing there on my own. So adventure racing pretty much combines any non-motorised sport, and depending on the country we're racing in, we can be doing anything. The core sports are mountain biking, kayaking, rafting, trekking or hiking, tramping, mountaineering. But added to that, we can do a number of different things. I've done races that have got sailing, inline skating, kayaking, horse riding, lots and lots of different things. So yeah, it depends what part of the world we're in, really, what can be in the race.
And I read in your book, it's in the introduction, you're talking about you're on the barren west coast of New Zealand, about to win your first world championships, the ocean's coming in from across, massive swell, and the feeling of euphoria. You've been awake for 120 hours or whatever it is, or minimal sleep, and you're about to win your first world championships. What does it take, like, from someone who gets into it from the first first decision to I'm going to get into mountain to adventure racing to that point? Like, it's obviously, like, for me as a novice in that situation, I'm thinking, where do you even start?
If I sort of look at myself as part of an adventure racing world champion team and work backwards from that and go, well, how did I end up in that situation? I think a big part of it was that for many years of my life, not only in my sport but also in my career, because outside of my sort of competitive sport, I've been working as an outdoor educator or an outdoor instructor or an outdoor adventure guide. And I think, without realising it, for many, many years, probably almost a decade, I was actually training for adventure racing without realising. And what I was doing was becoming very proficient at the skills that are required for adventure racing. So just being out there in the mountains and being out there on the ocean and travelling down all these rivers that I've done, all these adventure trips that I've done, not as training but just for recreation, is you learn so much in the outdoors from those experiences that lend themselves so well to adventure racing. And it can be little things. Well, perhaps they're not even that little, but I remember tramping, learning navigation as a young teenager and misreading a map and saying to my buddies, we should be at the hut in 2 hours. And then 6-7 hours later, you arrive at the hut. And then you're sitting around the hut at night going, well, how did we muck that up? And then we realise, we thought we were here, we thought we were at this river junction, but it turns out we were at this one. So you're learning all these things, but not only you're learning in that example, which has happened to me a number of times, you're not only learning navigation and how to be more accurate with your navigation, but you're also learning how to cope with sort of going beyond what you thought you needed to. And so all of a sudden, what might have been an 8 or 9 hour day in the hills has turned into a 15, 16 hour day. And I think you get confidence from that. And then just being on missions, you go away on a sea kayaking trip for 5 or 6 days and the weather forecast is great, but then it changes halfway through and the next thing you're dealing with high winds and heavy rain and all these things. So I guess you build a whole lot of resilience and adaptability and skills and how to sort of manage yourself in those environments. I combine that with my mountain bike racing and my multisport racing, and I line up at my first adventure race in 1999, and I'm totally like, I've got this. I mean, this shouldn't be that hard. This is not that different to what I've basically been doing just in life, really. And that was how it sort of transpired. Our team won the first major race we did. We qualified for the World Champs. We were on that road pretty much from day one.
So how do you select a team for these things? Because obviously there's probably not a lot of people lining up for this sort of thing. It's pretty extreme for most people, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for selecting a team for adventure racing, there's a couple of things really. I mean, the first thing is that you need people that can go the distance. There's no point in getting someone in your team at whatever level race you're doing who's not physically capable of getting through the challenges. So whether they be in mountain biking challenges or hiking or paddling, you need people in the team that can actually do what is required with the event. So that's the first thing. The second thing really is getting a combination of people together that will essentially create a high-performing team or a functioning team. Most teams don't finish adventure races, and the reason for that is because normally they've misjudged those two things. One is that they've either got someone or people in the team that are physically not capable of actually doing the challenge in the first place. They're just not ready. They're not trained for it. They don't have the skills. And the other thing would be that the teams at some point during the race become dysfunctional and they basically fall apart and don't finish. And so there's a really high attrition rate in a major adventure race. I've done races before where as little as, or less than 10% of the teams will actually reach the finish line.
Wow.
And that is normally because the teams will have a fallout out there and it's just not working for them. So it's really, really important to get a group of people together that are on the same page and share the same goal. For me, the level that we're racing at, I mean, our team has been hugely successful internationally. We've won 6 world championships as a team, and in most of the other sort of major events that take place around the world. So for us, in order to kind of keep achieving at that level, we need to be totally committed to functioning as a highly performing team. And I think the important thing is getting a group of people together that gel and that get along. Obviously there's some pretty common values that need to be in there. We need to be able to trust each other. That's a really big one. You want people that can respect each other and that are honest communicators. And I think you need people that have sort of good control of ego. So I think ego is a good thing in sport because often it's what will motivate a lot of people. So I don't sort of see ego as a bad thing, but I think it can be negative if people's ego are sort of putting themselves before the team. So you definitely need people who, I think, in a team who are willing to put the team first and make decisions based on what is best for the team or other individuals in the team sort of less than themselves, really.
So you're the captain of the team, Team New Zealand. They've also named you as the Lionel Messi of adventure racing. So you're like the guru, right? You're the main man. So obviously that comes with a lot of respect. And so when you're selecting or creating your team, what would you say are those core values of the team that you look for in your teammates?
Yeah, I think what I'm looking for in the teammates is a number of different things. I think what's important to me is that, first of all, that everyone in the team has got what I consider to be sort of healthy perspective on what it is we're doing. And it perhaps sounds a little bit crazy given that I've sort of been, adventure racing professionally for a number of years, I've had an adventure racing career of 20 years. But I think that a lot of people just take the sport and recreation just way too seriously. And for me, it's really important that when we go and race, that it's important that we do our best, and it's important that we sort of represent our sponsors, and that we go and have a good time. But at the end of the day, just kind of remind ourselves that it is just a sporting competition, and it should be fun. And we're making these sort of choices to come and do these challenging things because they're interesting, and it's kind of what we like. So what I sort of don't want is people who are just so obsessed with racing and results and sort of outcomes of the races that becomes a big focus of the team. It's not really my style. And so I think it's quite important, and it keeps the team environment quite relaxed and composed, because people are kind of, just a bit more even-keeled. So that's important for me. Certainly having the skills is critical, like across the collective skill level of the team, making sure that we have expertise in whatever it is that we're going to experience in the race. And it may not mean that everyone in the team is an expert at something, but at least one person has got a lot of knowledge in this particular area, so that we're not sort of floundering or trying to figure out how to do something while we're out on course or out during a race. I think the underlying thing for me, or what I keep in the back of my mind, is that my ideal teammates are people that, if I'm in their city where they live, that are the kind of people I'll actually message and go and have a coffee with. And it sounds simple, and you'd sort of think that would be normal, but for a lot of teams that's not the case. They actually get together for the races, but socially they don't really have that much in common. So there's lots of things for me. I think I really see my teammates as sort of family in that kind of environment, and I think that's quite important.
So I guess you get to see a lot of participants and athletes over your career, so you'll know who is probably in alignment with the values of the team and the skill base that you're looking for.
Yeah, so within New Zealand we're pretty lucky. We have a lot of athletes that are physically and mentally capable of doing sort of the expedition races around the world. Occasionally our core team will have some changes. Someone will decide they don't want to race anymore because career or family or whatever it may be. So every so often we do have to make some sort of changes to the core team or bring someone else in. For me, it's not just about bringing in the next fastest, strongest person that's kind of at the front of the line. Sometimes I'll actually look further down the line and go, well, this person may not be the strongest or fastest person, but I think they're going to fit into our team culture much better. And they can probably get faster or stronger if they need to, but their sort of personality and their values and sort of how they are, I think, is going to complement the existing team members. So I'm really mindful of that. Putting a team together is not just about having the highest sort of horsepower. It's getting a group of people together that will work collectively successfully. Well,
like you say, if there's certain races that are only having 10% completion rate, and that's because they're capitulating, the teams internally, that's probably proof, isn't it? It's not about the physical necessarily. Obviously it's an important part, but it's also the mental, emotional intelligence that under pressure allows you to stay calm and focus on the goal.
Yeah, often adventure races are won in the last few days. So if you sort of imagine a 5-day race, they're generally not won in the first 2 or 3 days. So people need to be quite patient. You need team members that are willing to play the long game and just be kind of mature about that kind of racing. And I think a lot of that comes down to having sort of trust and respect of each other. And I think for me, having raced for as long as I have and been team captain and perhaps some of the other sports that I've done, strategically, I tend to, I guess, call that more or make suggestions about how we should sort of race a particular race or what our strategy should be. And what's really important in that environment is that that my teammates have got trust in my decision making. And it's not to say that what I say, this is how we're going to do it. It's more about, well, this is what I suggest. But luckily, most of the time my teammates will go, oh, we trust you on that. If that's what you think, then let's give that a go, because historically you've generally been pretty accurate in calling races. And I think, and then the other thing is actually having the trust and faith to execute that. Like, I think a lot of teams will start a race with a pretty solid plan, but they don't stick to it. Somewhere along the way they come up with some other idea that's perhaps not so well thought out. They change their race strategy, change their plan, and things kind of go bad for them from that point on.
So there's a lot to be said about that, isn't there? So once emotion's up, intelligence is down, and they make decisions that were really under no duress, were pretty clear cut. But once the pressure goes on, have you personally had meltdowns yourself that have changed the course of a race, and how'd you deal with it? And then also, have your teammates had meltdowns, and then how'd you deal with that?
Yeah, I think one thing that's quite important to acknowledge is that our team has been hugely successful. We can't deny that. Like, we could try and be humble, but if someone actually looks at our results, they go, man, this team's actually won everything they touch. The context of that is that all the things that we're using to win the races that we're winning these days, or that we have won, are learnings from mistakes for races that we lost or haven't performed well. So for the first 10 years of my career, man, it was frustrating. I mean, we were making some dumb mistakes, and we were in that classic situation post-race going, we should have won that race, or we were winning that race, but we kind of threw it away. So we've learned the hard way. Like, a lot of our racing strategies and philosophies now are things that we've learned from making sort of mistakes ourselves. But I think it's really important to have that discipline to know that when you have a race plan, to actually trust that and follow it through. And we still have that. I remember in the World Champs with our team in 2016, it was in Brazil. We went into the race as defending champions. In fact, I think we just won the previous 2 World Championships to that. And on the first day of the race that night, I started to get really frustrated because I felt that our team wasn't racing to the strategy that we've spoken about in our sort of pre-race planning. And I challenged the team on that a few times. I said, hey guys, I don't think we're doing what we said we were going to do. And it actually kind of came undone a bit at the end of that day, and we did have a bit of a meltdown as a team. But, we are professional athletes, we know what it takes, we're all good mates, and we were like, deep breath everyone, yeah, let's just kind of settle down, get back into things, and get back on track. So it still happens to us, we can still get caught up in the excitement and the emotion of a race and kind of, unravel a wee bit. But I guess we're experienced enough to know just to sort of pull it back together pretty quick.
And I suppose there have been a few lost friendships over the years with whether it's in, I'm not sure about your team, but obviously if 90% of teams aren't finishing races, that you probably don't see those people in your team if you've sort of gone away from each other.
Yeah, I think unfortunately with some teams, they do end up being dysfunctional, and often that is just conflict between people and teams or personalities. And thankfully for me, I've never had any real major ones. I've definitely had some teams before we've had to make some sort of team changes. But yeah, I think it's just, sometimes people will line up in races with probably the wrong team and have negative experience.
And so with your teams, like from a training perspective, they're not all based in the same location, are they? They're all around New Zealand. So how do you formulate a plan for that from an overall training plan for everyone?
Yeah, so our core team is spread out throughout the country. So we actually don't really train much together or see each other that much during the year. But we just have a complete faith and trust in each other that for a major race, that people will go away and do the training that's required. So
periodisation, do you plan it out weeks in advance? Like, what does a typical training day look like for the team?
I'd say for most of the teammates that a typical day is usually around 4 to 6 hours of training, if I was to sort of throw a blanket over it. 20 to 30 hours a week is what, most of the top adventure racers will be looking at doing, building up to a race. And when I say building up, I mean that would be probably a minimum of 6 weeks out or perhaps 12 weeks out. I think adventure racers by nature are people that naturally stay fit because they're often out doing lots of adventure sport just because that's what they enjoy doing. So it's usually only in the period leading up to a race where people will kind of sort of really focus in on the race itself and start to do things. A training day for me is typically 2 disciplines a day, and I guess I'm sort of trying to sort of do roughly about 4 hours a day to sort of make up your 20-hour week, and you're doing some longer sessions in there as well. So what that transpires to, what that probably looks like, if I was to say it real simply, is it's probably doing sort of 3 to 4 kayak sessions a week, 3 to 4 bike rides, and sort of 3 to 4 sort of mountain runs or trekking sections. So that's kind of what it would sort of shape up like. And
nutrition, how important is that?
I think nutrition is really important. I think, it's the age-old sort of adage that, the only training you're going to benefit from is the training that you can recover from. And for me, recovery is 2 things. It's basically sleep and nutrition, which I think is quality food and hydration. So, I think I'm really mindful of that, especially as I sort of get older, that the training that I'm doing, I just need to be 100% sure that the recovery is there, because life's busy, with work and family and other stuff that's going on. So it's really important that that I'm eating well and that I'm getting hydrated as well. Like dehydration, I think can be a real block for a lot of athletes.
So being an extreme sport, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of effort. So for the viewers primarily out there, because you've made it work, how does it work for you financially, and then also from a work-life balance perspective with family and other interests that you might have?
Yeah, it's not easy. It does require a lot of work, and I have a lot of early mornings, a lot of late nights, and I think what that comes down to though is that I like to be busy and I like to be productive, and life's interesting when it's dynamic and there's exciting things happening. So I do seek that out. I like to fit a lot into a day, into a week, into a year. When I did the outdoor course as a young person many years ago, one of our tutors said to us a little adage that I really like, and that was, decide what you like doing and find someone to pay you to do it. And for a lot of my life, that has been the case. As a young teenager, or as a teenager, my first job was a sea kayak guide in a national park. So I was out there sea kayaking around for the day, and I was getting paid to do it. And then I was working in the ski industry and in the outdoor industry. And then I think I've just kind of carried that on. I've always sort of felt like, what is it I want to do? How can I sort of have this financially work for me? And with adventure racing, the same thing really. It's like, I really love adventure racing. I want to do a lot of adventure racing. How do I actually turn that into a career? Well, you get really good. You become a professional, you win prize money, you get sponsored. There's all these kind of roads into it once you decide what you want to do. So
is it like, if you take other sub businesses out of it, is it a lucrative career, and are sponsors lining up for that sort of thing? And like, how does it work?
So adventure racing financially is not great. There were some golden years back in the 2000s where we were racing for pretty good prize money. We were a fully sponsored team, we were professional, so that was my job. I was actually paid to train and travel and adventure race, which was fantastic. But we were making pretty good money back then. I mean, nothing compared to golf and tennis and those sort of things. But for outdoor adventurers, we were doing pretty good. And then from there, I guess it's more about the opportunities that you leveraged off. So I think it'll be fair to say that I've probably been sort of one of the few adventure racers in the world that has actually really made it into a career. And that's been by design. Like I think I've probably been just a bit more creative, and I've probably just tried harder than most to figure out how I can actually make this financially sustainable. and provide a platform for my family. Whatever I need to do, I need to justify it somehow. So adventure racing's been very good for me. I've managed to do really well out of that, and it's been a combination of sponsors, kind of endorsements and sponsorship, wage, winning prize money, but just leveraging off everything else really to kind of maximise that. So I think it's just about being creative and I guess quite entrepreneurial as well, about here's this opportunity, how do you kind of make the most of this?
Well, I noticed we talked about nutrition earlier, and obviously when you're out in the field for 6 days on the course, food's extremely important, and you've managed to turn that into a successful adventure racing food business. Would that be one way of putting it?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a theme with me, I guess, in business throughout things. Like the first example is that I was a sea kayak guide. That was my first job, in the outdoors. But after being a sea kayak guide for a number of years, I decided that really, to make money at a sea kayak guiding, you actually need to own the company. You can't just be a guide. So I started my own sea kayak company, and it was a very successful business. We won a New Zealand Business Award in our first year, and we built that business up and then sold it on. So for me, I've always sort of been that type of person, or that sort of thinker, going, hey, I love sea kayak guiding, it's great. But then I look around and go, well, who's actually making the money here? I'm not going to make a guide's wage is kind of fine if you're 18, but when you're 22, 23, I don't want to be on a guide's wage. So, we started a company, and I guess that's the same with adventure racing. Like, I got into adventure racing, and it was like, I'd love to go and do some races, but I actually want to make this into a career somehow. Like, if I'm going to do a lot of this, it needs to be sort of feeding back in. And so, I'm going to be the best in the world. I'm going to be a part of the best team that the sport's ever seen, and we're going to be real successful. So that's kind of my way of thinking.
So you're designing that before it even starts, like it's part of the decision process.
Absolutely, yeah.
It doesn't just happen by luck.
No, not at all. No. So when I sort of get into that, it's like, I'm not just going to go there to make up the numbers and have this experience. I'm going to do this. We're going to go right to the top. And our freeze dry food company is pretty similar, really, because 7 or 8, 9 years ago, we're starting to use quite a lot of freeze dry food in our racing, and starting to realise that the freeze dry technology is the ultimate way of carrying high quality nutrition while we're out on our competitions, because we can just have so much lighter backpacks. But then I realised, well, we're buying a lot of this freeze dry food. Well, why not start a freeze dry company? And then that kind of transpires, and now we have our own freeze dry food company. So I guess whatever it is I'm doing, I've always sort of been thinking, well, how do you actually maximise this?
So you're almost an experiment for yourself. You use it for yourself, then you're leveraging it and going, well, how do I turn this into a business that helps others at the same time? Yeah,
absolutely. Yep, it's about how do we make this just bigger and better, and create all these other opportunities. And the other business we have is our sporting events company, which is a similar thing again, really. Is I've been involved in sporting events all our life as a participant, and then it's like, well, it'd be nice to sort of go full circle on that and be involved in sporting events, but as the provider or the creator of those things, and that's a big part of what I do now as well.
And so tell us about that. That's the Spring Challenge? Is that the only one, or you've got multiple forms?
Yeah, so our events company has a number of different events, and some events we'll just pick up and run for a few years and then sort of drop them, or just sort of modify things. But our core event, our flagship event, is the Spring Challenge Women's Adventure Race, and that's a major event. We started that event 15 years ago, and that has grown into a really, really big event. It's women only, it's an adventure race, and we can have up to 600 teams racing some years, which is 1,800 women in one adventure race. Wow. which is huge. Which not only makes it the biggest adventure race in the world, but it's also women only. So it's it sort of has global significance in the sport of adventure racing.
Well, I guess it's the best in the world, it's the biggest in the world. You wouldn't have it any other way, would you?
Yeah, that's true. That's right. Yeah.
And so with your own training that's going on in your own racing, how do you have time to fit that in as well? Or do you have a great team around you to support that?
Yeah, I think fitting everything in is just a juggle, and it's something I've got pretty good at, and it's just being really well planned, really well disciplined. I think for me it's a lot about making sure that what I do is quality. So obviously the training that I do, I need to, I really need to make sure that I'm getting the returns from the training. I can't afford to go out there and just sort of waste hours. And yeah, it's really just about efficiency and making sure that I'm organised really in doing those things. So I'm very protective of family time. So we do a lot of adventures with our kids, and I'll just block out windows of time that go, right, this is going to be focused on doing stuff as a family or with our kids, and that's really important for us. So we do that, and then obviously I've got my sport that I was sort of protective of a certain amount of time, and then our businesses require a certain amount of time. So I think as long as things are kind of fairly planned. I mean, there's moments of chaos, but that's how we like to live as well.
Would you say in your racing that is your key role, is the strategy and the design, and then that's how it naturally sort of migrates to other areas?
Yeah, I think so. I think in our team I'm definitely the sort of strategist, but I'm sort of the manager as well. So I guess for me, I deal with the sponsors and the media and the event organisers, leading into the sort of event. So I'm sort of the big picture sort of person, and come the race itself, it allows me to take a bit of a back step and let my teammates come forward who are, in some ways more the executors of the race, in terms of the navigation, and obviously they bring their sort of skills and energy and firepower to that, but it's sort of the platform that I've sort of set up, I think, is what we race off. And yeah, often for me, the hardest part of the race for me in many ways is actually the pre-race stuff. Once the race starts, I can actually sort of sit back and just kind of take a bit of a back seat, which I enjoy.
Yeah. So if we're thinking about the young outliers out there who are looking at the start of their journey, and they're looking at someone like you going, oh my God, I'll never be able to do that. That seems like so much hard work and effort and time, and time in particular, because it's not just a overnight success thing, right? Most people think it's overnight success. It's actually a process or a journey. What advice would you have for them when they're starting that journey to assess whether it's potentially even worthwhile or not?
Yes, I've got a model that I've used quite a lot. It's a basic sort of triangle, and on the point of each triangle, I mean, it's a pretty easy thing to sort of scribble on paper, but at the top of the triangle, I'd have the word passion, and then on one of the other corners of the triangle, I would say would have a dollar sign, which actually represents does this produce an income, and then the other sort of remaining part of the triangle would be, is that a skill set that you possess? So you've got these three things. There's passion, there's money, and there's skills. And what I would sort of encourage people to do, and this is what I've done with any sort of thing I've done in terms of business or just sort of direction in life, is put something through that model, and really what you're wanting to achieve, or it's probably more than that actually. It's like I wouldn't actually go near anything unless I'm ticking all three of those things off. Now, if you sort of break those down, it's very easy to sort of come up with lots of ideas that might hit two of those things. So if you're thinking about, like a new project or a business or heading off in some sort of direction or change, then you want to be sure that what you're doing is actually ticking all three of those things. So if you sort of look at it piece by piece, most people will come up with things that they'll have skills in and that they're passionate about. So they'll go, oh yeah, I really love this, I'm good at it, I'm really keen to kind of work in this field. But then if you ask the question, well, how does that generate money? Well, then a lot of the time it won't, or not enough. So then you go, well, that's probably not going to work. I mean, that's great, you're doing something you're passionate about, I really admire that, I think it's important. You've got skills in that area, but it's not making any money, so how's that going to work? It's not sustainable. Or you sort of switch the corridor and line up two other things. You go, well, so someone will say, look, I'm really passionate about this, I love this kind of thing, and it makes money. I go, well, that's great, excellent. Have you got skills in that area? And then they go, if they're honest, they go, well, actually I haven't. So it's okay, well, that might work for you, but you need to go and upskill. You need to get skills and experience in this area before you take this on. And then the other one is that a lot, and this is probably the most common one, is people will go, I've got skills in this area, I can do this, it makes money, but I'm actually not passionate about it. And for me, that collapses that as well. So what I'm looking for is things that will hit all three of those things. So for me, I'll literally will go into a project or look at something and go, is it ticking all three of these boxes? And if it does, then it's great. And that is, I'm passionate about this, which basically means I'm excited about it. I'm going to wake up in the morning early because I want to get my teeth into this project. Like, I'm really engaged by it. The other one is I've got skills and experience in this area. So it's like, this is using my skill set. I'm in control of this. I'm still learning, but this is something I can do. I'm into it, and I've got skills in the area. And the last one is like, if this works, it is financially rewarding. Like, it is actually making a profit, or it's injecting money into the fund, I guess you could say. And for me, my advice to any outliers out there that are looking at those projects, if you're not ticking all three of those boxes, move on.
Yeah, no matter how hard that would be. Like, for some people it might be quite tough, especially if they're really passionate about a cause, wouldn't it be?
Absolutely, and I think that's the thing, is when you tick that passion box, it's really hard to let go of things. But yeah, if they look back, I think if anyone was really honest and look at the things that have been successful for them in the past, they'll find that they would have hit those three things, and the things that they probably haven't, probably one of them is missing, I would say.
And so a big question is, so you've looked at your history and you look at outdoor adventure and you look at adventure racing. How much do you see a 6-day race being a reflection of life in general for people? It's like a microcosm, right? In 6 days you're going to find out a lot about yourself and your teammates, aren't you? So how does that, do you think about it to that depth when you're doing it, or is it you've gone past that by now because you've done it that many times?
Yeah, I think with any sporting event you do, or journey, there's a lot of learning that can apply to life if you kind of take the time to reflect on that and try and extract it. Adventure racing is often said that it is like condensing a year of emotion and intensity into 1 week. Which I think has some sort of truth in it. But for me, one of the things I've really learned about adventure racing is the importance of not focusing on the finish line. And I did a race in 2000, which started in China and Tibet and went through the Himalayas, across Nepal and finished in India. It was about a 1,000k race. And on the start line of that race, I couldn't really see how it's possible that all the teams there really were going to travel through such challenging terrain and finish that course in the time frame that was kind of available. I just didn't see how it was possible. But what I learned from that race, and have subsequently learned from other races I've done, is that what's actually important is to focus on the process and not sort of the outcome or the result or the finish line, the end game. I think it's important to have that, know where that is and what ultimately you're aiming for. But on a day-to-day level, what's really important is focusing on the process. So what that means for our team out there adventure racing is that in a typical adventure race there might be 12 or 15 stages, but what's critical, or I think is vital for a team's success in that sport is that you just focus on the stage at hand. So you really are just living in the moment. So what that means is if a race starts with, say, a 55-kilometre mountain bike ride, then what's really important for our team is that we get out there and just do that stage to the best of our ability. So, we're looking after each other, we're encouraging each other, supporting each other, we're navigating well, we're riding sensibly so we're not risking damaging our bikes. And then we just get through the stage as quick as we practically can and as best we can. And then when that stage finishes, then we go on to the next one, which might be kayaking 30, 40 kilometres across a lake or something. So therefore, then we're okay. Now our job is to kayak as best we can and do all the things that kind of essentially define good kayaking. After a while, by doing that, just focusing on the moment, the stage you're on, and the process of doing all those things as best you can, the stages just tick by, the days tick by, and then sooner or later you're on the stage that takes you to the finish line. And it's like, well, here we are, we've arrived at the finish. But you actually haven't been focusing on that finish line much at all until that point. And I've learned that through sort of the business stuff I've done. Like with our freeze-dry company, we've got goals, we've got an end game that we would like to get to a finish line. Like we can kind of see where we'd like this company to finally get to, which is obviously to be a hugely successful business and create lots of employment and supply all these amazing adventurers with great meals out in the outdoors. But that takes time, you know, to build a company to that sort of size and scale. And if I was sort of day to day just to kind of be thinking about that end goal, it would actually just be demoralising, because it's so different from where you are at any given time. So with that company, like, I'm very mindful of going, well, what's important right now? What's important is we run the factory to its production kind of efficiencies on a day-to-day basis, and then it's about having a really good season. You know, it's a seasonal business for us here in New Zealand, so, you know, focusing on this summer or this financial year, and next thing you know, sort of 4 or 5 years have gone past, and you can look back and go, well, we've actually achieved a whole lot we can be really proud of. You know, we are actually moving through this course really well. We've still got a way to go, but we've actually come a long way, and it's about celebrating that. And so, yeah, I really encourage people to, you know, to have ambitious goals and dreams, but really it's the stages in between that you really need to focus your energy on.
Nathan, the rain's about to fall. We've had a fantastic time. Just looking back in time to the start of your journey, what would you say to the teacher who said hasn't fulfilled his potential?
Well, I'd probably say thanks for the advice. I mean, I think he gave me something to think about and set me on a path to prove him wrong, I think.
Well, Nathan, you're officially an outlier. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Well, guys, there it is. I hope you enjoyed this inspiring Outlier episode with Nathan Faavae. For more videos, resources and information, visit outlier.tv or connect with us on our social media pages below. I'm Andrew McComb, and here's to living the outlier life outside of the comfort zone. I'll see you soon.